got an email from them that the Pope in Rome has said they're canceling all masses every day. Everything stopped in Rome for the next like 3 or 4 weeks. And so I haven't emailed my family back. It's a big group text. And I said, well, just have them tell all the Catholics to live stream El Shaddai, you know. So anyway, for all of you in the United States that might be live streaming, or all those locally here that might be live streaming, encourage people who are canceling their church services that they can all live stream El Shaddai Ministries from home, and everything will be well. But in all honesty, too, if you do not feel good, please don't come to El Shaddai. But at the same time, also, even if you do feel good, if you are one of those who are vulnerable, maybe you're not of well health, well, please don't feel obligated or guilt if you don't come. For heaven's sake, stay home for your sake, your health's sake. We encourage you to stay home. I really believe and hope that all this will be over in a few weeks anyway, and it's all going to be fine. But we still want to, out of concern, we know that, and I believe this very well could be of the Lord, but regardless, we're to intervene and stand in and pray. So the way we want to kick off this Purim Party is with prayer, and we have this prayer that I believe is available on our website. It is a prayer for protection. It's a prayer for healing. And I would love all of you around the world who are live streaming, if you haven't, hopefully you've already downloaded this prayer, because I mentioned earlier that we're going to pray it. But let's all stand, and let's pray this prayer in heaven that God would protect our city, our county, our state, our nation, as well as whatever nation you're live streaming from. I notice we already have about a dozen nations that are live streaming. So join us in this prayer, or if you don't have a copy of it, you can just join in along as we pray. But let's start. Our Father in heaven, let our prayers be counted as incense before you, like the incense that Aaron the priest carried quickly to the congregation to make atonement for them. For wrath has gone out from the Lord, the plague has begun. Let the Son of Righteousness rise with healing in his wings. As it says, he stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was stopped. For how can we bear to see the harm that would befall our people? Spare your people, O Lord, and do not make your heritage a reproach. As it says in the Torah of your servant Moses, I will take sickness away from among you, and the Lord will take away from you all sickness and none of the evil diseases of Egypt, which you knew will he inflict on you. I will put none of the diseases on you that I put on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord your healer. Compassionate Father, who creates the cure before the affliction, heal us, O Lord, and we will be healed. Save us, and we will be saved, for you are our praise. For your salvation I do wait. O Lord, dispatch your salvation from Zion, as it says, whatever plague, whatever sickness there is, whatever prayer, whatever plea is made by any person or by all your people Israel, each knowing the affliction of his own heart and stretching out his hands towards this house, hear our prayers in heaven, your dwelling place, and forgiven act, that we may all fear you and live. Help us, O God of our salvation, for the sake of the glory of your name. Do not look upon our wickedness. Instead, deal with us with charity and devotion, as it says. He takes pity on the downtrodden and poor, and the souls of the poor he saves. Act for the sake of our Master Yeshua, to whom you gave the authority to heal every disease and sickness, of whom it is written, surely he carried our sicknesses and bore our diseases. In his merit and virtues, May the sayings of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be favorable before you, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. You may be seated. And Sherry, Les, why don't you come on up and mention what we're going to do with the kids?
Okay, we'd like all the kids to come on up and stand on this side. And we're going to have a contest to see how much you know about Purim. Woohoo! If you know the answer, okay? Thank you. Okay, Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, also known as Esther. Okay, you're going to get a prize, but wait until we're done, okay? Here's the next one. Esther had neither father nor mother, so she was an... Yes. Good. Mordecai had taken Esther as his own... That's good. Daughter. Yes, absolutely. Okay, Esther did not tell the king or his officials that she was... Yes, excellent. All right, King Ahasuerus liked Esther, and he put a crown on her head to make her the... Yes, excellent. Okay. Haman had a plan to kill Mordecai and all the... It is from Shabbat school. Who did he want to kill? All the Jewish people. Excellent. Okay. Who did Mordecai tell about Haman's evil plan? He did. He told Esther. Okay. Yes, he wasn't a good guy. What did Esther ask the Jewish people to do? Pray. Yes. What happened to Haman when the king found out the true plan? Yes, absolutely. All right, I'll ask you the question again. Are you ready? What happened to Haman when the king found out the true plan? Do you remember what he built? And what was on that big platform? Was it something you put around your neck? No, not exactly. If you're a bad guy and you want to do something bad.
It hung. Yeah.
And he got hung. Yes, he got hung on the gallows he built. Okay. How was Mordecai honored? Yes. Exactly. He got the beautiful robe of royalty and he rode high up on the horse. Yes. Okay. What happened to the Jewish people? Yes. I bet you know. Okay. Who knows? What happened to the Jewish people? Did they all die? No. What happened? They were all saved. Yay. So let's eat. All right. Go get a prize. Everybody go get prizes at the back table. Good job.
All right, I'm back. Oh, I think this will. Yes. There we go. Yes, okay. Before we get started reading the Megillah or the Esther Scroll, I want to give you guys a little test, a quiz. Actually, I'm just going to kind of tell you a story because there's a lot of things people don't realize about how important this book is and the tie-ins from like 1,000 years before. Okay, do you remember when Moses was leaving Egypt? This is about 1500 BC. Okay, real quick. Noah is about 1,500 years after Adam. Another 500 years, about 2,000 after Adam, is Abraham. 500 years from Abraham is Moses. 500 years after Moses is David. 500 years after that basically is destruction of the temple. There's a lot of things that are happening during this time frame. But do you remember what nation tried to attack Israel first when they left Egypt? Amalek. It was the Amalekites. Remember that? Okay, and God told Saul, God had told Moses, Amalek's going to try to attack you constantly. Okay, but he says when Saul becomes king, or when the king comes and it's Saul, I'm going to tell everyone to go destroy Amalek. But Haman, but what happens is Saul, first of all, he's supposed to kill Agag. Agag is the king of the Amalekites. But what does Saul do? He spares them. All right? So, in 1500 BC, God tells Moses, make sure when the time comes you kill Amalek. 500 years later, Saul is king. Time to kill Amalek. Saul spares Amalek. Okay? So what happens 400 or 500 years later comes the story of Purim. And guess who is a direct descendant of Saul? No. Mordecai. Mordecai is a direct descendant of Saul. And who's a direct descendant of Agag? Haman. Boo. All right, now we're getting started. Okay. But Mordecai. Hey. All right. So we find that things that have happened historically can have great ramifications in the future if we don't obey God, right? Okay, well, let me explain something. In the book of Purim, is the name of God ever mentioned? But is he there? The whole concept of Purim is how God is in the background moving mightily. Well, what's fascinating, there's something that I'm going to share with you that many of you may not be aware of. Okay, how many of you have ever heard of Shimei? All right, well, let's talk for a minute about Shimei. There was this time when King David was fleeing from his son Absalom. Absalom was wanting to kill King David. Here's my first quiz. Who became king over Israel after Saul? Right. It was not David. And most people miss this. The king that followed King Saul, what happens if you remember, Saul is killed. 3 of his sons are killed. They cut off their heads and mounted on a poles. All right. And so what happens? Judah anoints David as king over Judah. But Abner, the nephew of Saul, he is the captain of Saul's army, and he appoints Saul's son Ishbosheth as king over Israel. And he's king over Israel for 2 years. And there was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David for about 2 years. So actually, the next king over Israel was Ishbosheth. And just Judah was king, David was just king over Judah. Okay, so what happens in the process of time, what happens is David is now king over Judah, and he's trying to reconcile things. Saul, if you remember Joshua, 400 years earlier, do you remember the story of the Gibeonites? Joshua was to drive all of the Gibeonites out of the land. But what happened? These Gibeonites said, we don't want to go. So what let's do, let's dress up like we've been on a long journey. And they put on these old clothes, and they go to Joshua, and they say, oh, we are not of this land. We are foreigners. We want to make peace with you. So they make peace with the Gibeonites not to kill them, and then they find out they lied. They were really of the land, and now they had made peace with them. Anyone familiar with that story? Okay. Well, several hundred years later, Saul, before he dies, betrays the Gibeonites and slaughters a bunch of them. And so what happens, David goes to the Gibeonites. He's trying to reconcile this whole situation. The Gibeonites say, okay, we want the heads of 7 other sons of Saul. And so what happens, he goes and he gets 7 of Saul's other sons from his other wives and turns them over to the Gibeonites, and they cut their heads off. Okay, now, so what happens, one of another sons of Saul, generationally, goes up to David when David is fleeing from Absalom, and he's cursing David. His name was Shimei, and he is one of the Benjamites, sons of Saul, who is cursing David as David is running, and he says, you have bloody hands because of what you've done to all the Benjamites. And one of Saul's soldiers says, hey, do you want me to cut his head off? And David said, no, this is of the Lord, that this man Shimei is cursing me. Let him be. And off they go. Well, it so happens, and I don't have time to go into all the stories, but they're incredible. Absalom dies. David is coming back, and now Shimei is concerned because David's coming back, and when David arrives, he's bowing down saying, oh, forgive me for cursing you, forgive me for cursing you. Now, David, a second time, has the opportunity to lop off his head, and he doesn't. He lets him be. But as the story goes on, when David is about to die, he tells his son Solomon, remember Shimei and what he did. So Solomon now tells Shimei, okay, we're going to let you live, but you can never leave Jerusalem. You have to stay in Jerusalem. But 2 of his slaves run off to like Gaza, and so he leaves Jerusalem to go after his 2 slaves. And so Solomon is now justified, and he slays him. But think about it. You know what would have happened if David took judgment in his own hands and slew Shimei one of those 2 times? Do you know what would have happened? There would have been no Mordecai. Mordecai was a son of Shimei, who was a son of Saul, who was a son of Kish. And so it's amazing when we try to take justice into our own hands and not understanding the whole picture, we can cause a lot of problems. How often do people curse us or do things to us and we want to go destroy them? But this is where we have to be humble. We have to submit to the Lord and say, Lord, you are the one that is writing this story. And we have to submit to you, not take vengeance in our own hands, because you could be destroying the very thing that is going to bring the cure to your family historically down the road. Isn't that amazing? In light of that, too, when you think of Purim and all the death and destruction, when you look at all the babies that have been aborted over the last, 50, 60 years, who knows how many of them could have been the one that would produce the scientific miracle to cure some disease or something. But anyway, this is why we always have to pursue life and not be the ones to judge. Does that make sense? Amen and amen. It's really an incredible story. Well, let's have our readers come up. Make sure you get your groggers and stomp your feet. You know when to do it. And we're going to start the book of Esther. Esther. We're going to start the book of Esther. All right. All right, come on, readers. Come on, readers. And oops. Oh no, now they recognize me. All right. Is everybody ready? We can have more readers. If any of you want to read too, feel free to come up when the time comes, or just jump on up here. Come on, Michael. Oh, no glasses on. All right, are we ready? Here we go. You can grab the sheets. I believe everyone has a copy if they want to follow along. Here we are. I will begin it off. And it happened in the days of Ahasuerus. This is the Ahasuerus who reigned from India even to Ethiopia, over 127 provinces. In those days when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom in Shushan the palace, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast to all his princes and servants. The power of Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of the provinces were before him. And he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty many days, 180 days. And when these days had expired, the king made a feast to all the people who were present in Shushan the palace, both to great and small, for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. White, green, and blue hangings were fastened with cords of fine linen, and purple to silver rings and pillars of marble. The beds were of gold and silver on a pavement of red and white and pearl and black marble. And they gave them drink in vessels of gold, the vessels being different from one another, and royal wine in abundance, according to the hand of the king. And the drinking was according to the law, so no one compelling. For the king had commanded every chief of his house that they should do according to every man's pleasure.
Also, Vashti, the queen, had made a feast for the women in the royal house which belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded the 7 eunuchs, Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, and Abagtha, Zathar, and Archas, who served in the presence of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the royal crown, in order to show the people and the princes her beauty, for she was beautiful to look on. But the queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command by the eunuchs. And the king was very angry, and his anger burned within him. And the king said to the wise men who knew the times, for so that was the king's manner toward all who knew law and judgment, and the next to him was these guys, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who saw the king's face, who sat first in the kingdom. What shall we do with Queen Vashti according to the law? Because he has not done the command of the king Ahasuerus by the eunuchs. And Memucan answered before the king and princes, Vashti the queen has not only done wrong to the king, but also to all the princes and to all the people who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the matter of the queen shall go out to all the women, so their husbands shall be despised in their eyes, and it shall be reported that King Ahasuerus commanded to bring Vashti the queen in before him, but she did not come. And this day the princesses of Persia and Media shall say the same to all the king's princes who have heard of the deed and of the queen, and there will be contempt and strife.
If it please the king, let there be a royal command from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be changed, that Vashti come no more before King Ahasuerus. And let the king give her royal state to another who is better than she is. And when the king's decree which he shall make shall be published throughout all his empire, for it is great, all the wives shall give their husbands honor. Yeah. I'm sorry. Where is she? Okay. Both the great and the small. And the saying pleased the king and the princes. And the king did according to the word of Memucan. For he sent letters to all the king's provinces into every province according to the writing of it, and to every people in their language, so that every man should bear rule in his own house, and published according to the language of every people. Yeah. After these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus had calmed down, he remembered Vashti and what she had done, and what was decreed against her. And the king's servants who served him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king, and let the king choose officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, so that they may gather together all the beautiful young virgins to Shushan the palace, to the house of the women, to the hand of Hegai, the king's eunuch, keeper of the women, and let their ointments be given. And let the young women who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. The thing pleased the king, and he did so. In Shushan, the palace, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai. Hey, I love that guy. The son of Jair, the son of Shimei. Yes. The son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity, which had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. And he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, hey, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, and the young woman was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter.
And it happened when the king's command and his order was heard, and when many young women had been gathered to Shushan the palace into the hand of Hegai, Esther, yay, was also brought to the king's house into the hand of Hegai, keeper of the women. And the young woman pleased him, and she received kindness from him, and he quickly gave to her purifiers and her portion, and 7 young women who were fit to be given her out of the king's house. And he moved her and her servant women to the best place in the house of the women. Esther had not revealed her people nor her kindred, for Mordecai had commanded her that she should not show it. And Mordecai walked every day in front of the court of the women's house in order to know how Esther did and what was to become of her. And when the turn of each young woman had come to go in to King Ahasuerus after she had been purified 12 months, according to the law of the women, for so the days of their anointing were done, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with sweet odors, and with the perfumes of the women. And in this way the young woman came to the king. Whatever she desired was given her to go with her out of the house of the women to the king's house. She went in the evening, and on the next day she returned to the second house of the women, into the hand of Shashgaz, the king's officer who kept the concubines.
She did not come into the kingdom unless the king delighted in her. She was And when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her for his daughter, had come to go in, she asked nothing, but was chosen by Haggai, the king's officer, the keeper of the women. And Esther had favor in the sight of all who looked on. Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his house in the 10th, which is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther above all the women, and she rose in grace and favor in his sight more than all. And he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And the king made a great feast to all his princes and his servants, Esther's feast. And he ordered a release for the provinces and gave gifts according to the state of the king. And when the virgins were gathered the second time, then Mordecai sat in the king's gate. Esther had not yet revealed her kindred nor her people, as Mordecai had commanded her. For Esther obeyed the command of Mordecai, as she did when she was brought up with him.
In those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, two of the king's eunuchs, Bigtan and Teresh, of those who kept the door, were angry and tried to lay a hand on King Ahasuerus. And the thing was known to Mordecai, who told Esther, the queen, and Esther told the king in Mordecai's name. And when the matter was searched into, it was found out, two of them were hanged on a tree. And it was written in the book of matters of the days before the king. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes who were with him, and all the king's servants in the king's gate bowed and worshipped Haman. For the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai did not bow nor worship.
And the king's servants in the king's gates said to Mordecai, "Why did you transgress the king's command?" And it happened when they spoke daily to him, and when he did not listen to them, they told Haman to see if Mordecai's matters would stand, for he told them that he was a Jew. And when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow nor worship him, then Haman was full of wrath, and he scorned to lay hands only on Mordecai, for they had revealed to him the people of Mordecai. And Haman sought to destroy all the Jews throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, the people of Mordecai. In the first month, that is, the month of Nisan, is the 12th year of King Ahasuerus. They cast the lot before Haman from day to day, and from month to month, to the 12th month, the month of Adar. And Haman said to King Ahasuerus that there is a certain people scattered abroad, and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your king, and their laws and different from all the people, neither did they keep the king's laws, and it is not for the king's gain to allow them to live. If it pleases the king, let it be written, and they may be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those who gave charge of the business to bring into the king's treasures. And the king took his ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the Jews' enemy.
And the king said to Haman, the silver is given to you, the people also to do with them as seems good to you. Then the king's scribes were called on the 13th day of the first month. And there was written according to all that Haman had commanded to the king's lieutenants and to the governors who were over every province, and to the rulers of every people of every province, according to the writing of it, and to every people according to their language. It was written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's ring. And the letters were sent by postal riders, the Pony Express, and to all the king's provinces, to destroy, to kill, to cause to perish all Jews, young and old, little children and women, in one day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to take what they own for a prize. The copy of the writing for a command to be given in every province was published to all people to be ready for that day. The posts went out being hurried by the king's command, and the decree was given in Shushan the palace. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Shushan was perplexed, and Mordecai, he understood all that was done, and Mordecai tore his clothes, put on sackcloth with ashes, went out into the middle of the city and cried with a loud and bitter cry. He even came before the king's gate, for none might enter the king's gate clothed with sackcloth.
And in every province, wherever the king's command and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting, and weeping, and wailing. And many lay in sackcloth and ashes, and Esther's servant women and her eunuchs came and told her. And the queen was exceedingly grieved, and she sent clothing to clothe Mordecai and to take away his sackcloth from him. It was not a good look, but he did not receive it. And Esther called for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, whom he had appointed to attend on her, and gave her a command to Mordecai to know what it was and why it was. And Hathach went forth to Mordecai to the street of the city in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai told him of all that had happened to him, and of the sum of the silver which Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries and the Jews in order to destroy them. Also, he gave him a copy of the writing of the decree which was given at Shushan in order to destroy them, to show it to Esther, and to declare it to her, and to command her that she should go into the king to make supplication to him and to seek help for her people.
And Hathach came and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Again, Esther spoke to Hathach and gave him command to Mordecai. And the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that whoever, whether man or woman, shall come to the king into the inner court who is not called, there is one law of his execution, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter so that he may live. But I have not been called to come in to the king these 30 days. And they told Mordecai Esther's words, and Mordecai commanded them to answer Esther. Do not think within yourself that you shall escape in the king's house more than all the Jews, for if you are completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance shall arise to the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house shall be destroyed. And who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for a time like this?
And Esther said to return to Mordecai this answer: Go, gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan, and fast for me, and do not eat nor drink 3 days, day or night. My maidservants and I will also fast in the same way. So I will go into the king, which is not according to the law. If I perish, I perish. Mordecai passed over and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. And it happened on the third day, Esther put on royal clothing and stood in the inner court across from the king. And the king sat on his royal throne, the royal house, across from the gate of the house. And it happened when the king saw Esther, the queen, standing in the court, she received favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter in his hand. And Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. The king said to her, What do you desire, Queen Esther? And what is your wish? It shall be given to you, even to half of the kingdom. And Esther answered, If it is good to the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet which I have prepared for him. And the king said, Cause Haman to hurry so that he may do as Esther has said. And the king and Haman came to the banquet which Esther had prepared.
And the king said to Esther at the banquet of wine, What is the petition that it shall be granted to you? And what is your request? It shall be performed, even half of the kingdom. And Esther answered and said, As to my petition and my request, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet which I shall prepare for them. And I will do tomorrow as the king has said. And Haman went forth the day joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he did not stand up nor moved for him. He was full of fury against Mordecai. But Haman held himself in. And when he came home, he sent and called for his friends of Zeresh, his wife, and Haman told them of the glory of his riches and his many sons, and all to which the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the princes and servants of the king. And Haman said, Yes, Esther, the queen, let no man but me come in with the king to the banquet, and that she had prepared. And also tomorrow I am invited to her banquet with the king. Yet all his avails, yet all this avails me nothing as long as I see Mordecai, the Jew, sitting at the king's gate.
And Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends said to him, Why, make a wooden gallows 50 cubits high, and tomorrow speak to the king that Mordecai may be hung on it. Boo. Then go in merrily with the king to the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, and he caused a wooden gallows to be made. On that night the king could not sleep. He commanded to bring the book of the records of the matter of the days, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, the keepers of the doors, who tried to lay a hand on King Ahasuerus. And the king said, What honor and dignity has been done to Mordecai for this? And the king's servants who served him said, Well, nothing's been done for him. And the king said, Who's in the court?
And Haman had come into the outer court of the king's house to speak to the king to hang Mordecai on the wooden gallows which he had prepared for him. And the king's servant said to him, Behold, Haman stands in the court. And the king said, Let him come in. So Haman came in. And the king said to him, What shall be done to the man whom the king delights to honor? And Haman thought in his heart, To whom would the king delight to do honor more than myself? And Haman answered the king, For the man whom the king delights to honor, let the royal clothes be brought, which the king wears, and the horse that the king rides on, and the royal crown which is set on his head. And let this clothing and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, so that they may dress the man whom the king delights to honor, and bring him on horseback through the streets of the city, and proclaim before him, This is what shall be done to the man whom the king delights to honor.
And the king said to Haman, Make haste, take the clothing and the horse, as you have said, and do even so to Mordecai, the Jew who sits at the king's gate. Do not fail to do any of all the things you have spoken. And Haman took the clothing and the horse and dressed Mordecai and brought him on horseback through the street of the city and proclaimed before him, this is what shall be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. And Mordecai came again to the king's gate. But Haman hurried to his house mourning and having his head covered. And Haman told Zeresh his wife and all his friends everything that had happened to him. Then his wise men and Zeresh his wife said to him, if Mordecai is of the seed of the Jews, before whom you have begun to fall, you shall not prevail against him, but shall surely fall before him.
And while they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs came, and they hurried to bring Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared. And the king and Haman came to the banquet of Esther, the queen. And the king said again to Esther, on the second day of the banquet of wine, what is your petition, Queen Esther? That it may be granted you. And what is your request? And it shall be performed, even to half of the kingdom. And Esther, the queen, answered and said, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to perish. But if we had been sold for men slaves and women slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could not make up the king's damage.
And King Ahasuerus answered and said to Esther, the queen, who is he, and where is the one who dares presume in his heart to do so? And Esther said, the man who is our adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. And Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. The king, arising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went into the palace garden. And Haman stood up to beg for his life from Esther, the queen, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. And the king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet of wine. And Haman had fallen on the bed of which Esther was. And the king said, will he also force the queen before me in the house?
And the word went out of the king's mouth, and they covered Haman's face. And Harbona, one of the eunuchs, said before the king, hey, look over there, the wooden gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who had spoken good of the king, stands in the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him high. And they hung Haman on the wooden gallows that they had prepared for Mordecai. And the king's wrath lay down. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave the house of Haman, the Jews' enemy, to Esther, the queen. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was to her. And the king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. And Esther spoke yet again before the king, fell down at his feet, begged him with tears to put away the evil of Haman, the Agagite, and his plot which he had plotted against the Jews.
Then the king held out the golden scepter towards Esther. And Esther arose and stood before the king and said, if it please the king, that if I found favor in his sight, and if the thing is right before the king, and if I am pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to bring back the documents, a sly plan by Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews in all the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see the evil that shall come on my people? Or how can I endure to see the slaughter of my kindred? And King Ahasuerus said to Esther, the queen, and to Mordecai, the Jew, behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and it was a nice house, and have hanged him on the wooden gallows because he laid his hand on the Jews. And you write for the Jews as it pleases you in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring. For the writing which is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring, no man may turn back.
Then the king's scribes were called at that time in the 3rd month, the month Sivan, on the 23rd of it, and it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded to the Jews, and to the lieutenants and the governors and rulers of the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, to every province according to the writing of it, and to every people in their writing, and to the Jews according to their writing and according to their language. And he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed it with the king's ring. And he sent letters by riders on horseback, riders on royal steeds, stallions, even sons of mares. In them the king granted the Jews in every city to gather themselves and to stand for their life, to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all the power of the people and province who desired to attack them, little ones and women, and to take what they owned for a prize, on one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. The copy of the writing for a command to be given in every province was announced to all people, even that the Jews should be ready against that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The runners, riders on stallions, royal steeds went out, being hurried and pressed on by the king's command, and the order was given at Shushan the palace.
And Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal clothing of blue and white, and with a great crown of gold, and with a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. And in every province and in every city where the king's command and his order came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day. And many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell on them. And in the 12th month, the month Adar, on the 13th day of the same, when the king's command and his order came to be done, and the day that the enemies of the Jews hoped to have power over them, though it was turned around so that the Jews had rule over the ones who hated them. The Jews gathered themselves in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus in order to lay hand on any who sought their harm. And no man could withstand them, for the fear of them fell on all people. And all the rulers of the provinces and the lieutenants and the governors and officers of the king helped the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai fell on them.
And for Mordecai was great in the house of the king, and his fame went throughout all the provinces. For this man Mordecai was going on and growing greater. And the Jews struck all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, and slaughter and destruction, and did what they would to those who hated them. And in Shushan, the palace of the Jews, killed and destroyed 500 men, and the 10 sons of Haman killed the enemy of the Jews, but they did not lay their hands on the spoil. And on that day, the number of those who were killed in Shushan, the palace, was brought before the king.
And the king said to Esther, the queen, the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men in Shushan the palace and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? And what is your petition, that it may be granted you? Or what further request do you have, and it shall be done? Then Esther said, if it pleases the king, let it be granted to the Jews in Shushan to do tomorrow according to this day's decree, and let Haman's 10 sons be hung on the gallows. And the king commanded it to be done, and the order was given at Shushan, and they hung Haman's 10 sons. For the Jews in Shushan gathered themselves on the 14th day also of the month of Adar, and killed 300 men at Shushan. But they did not lay their hands on the spoil. But the rest of the Jews in the king's provinces gathered themselves and stood for their lives and had rest from their enemies, killed 75,000 of their foes, but they did not lay hands on the spoil.
And on the 13th day of the month, Adar, and on the 14th day of the same, they rested and made it a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews at Shushan gathered on the 13th of it, and on the 14th of it. And on the 15th of the same, they rested and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore, the Jews of the villages who lived in the unwalled towns made the 14th day of the month a day of gladness and feasting, and a good day, and a day of sending portions to one another. And Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters to all the Jews in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus, near and far, to establish among them that they should keep the 14th day of the month of Adar and the 15th day of the same yearly as the days in which the Jews rested from their enemies, and the month which was returned to them from sorrow to joy, and from mourning into a good day, that they should make these days of feasting and joy, and of sending portions to one another, and gifts to the poor. And the Jews undertook to do as they had begun, and as Mordecai had written to them, because Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agite, and the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast Pur the lot to finish them and to destroy them.
But when Esther came before the king, he commanded by letters that his wicked plot, which he had plotted against the Jews, should return on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the wooden gallows. Therefore they called these days Purim, after the name Pur. Therefore, for all the words of this letter, and which they had seen concerning this matter, and which had come to them, the Jews ordained and took on them and on their seed, and on all such as joined themselves to them, so as it should not fail, that they would keep these 2 days according to their writing and according to their time every year, and that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city. And these days of Purim should not fail from among the Jews, nor the memorial of them perish from their seed.
And Esther, the queen, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai, the Jew, wrote with all authority to confirm the second letter of Purim. And he sent the letters to all the Jews, to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, with words of peace and truth, in order to confirm these days of Purim in their set times, according as Mordecai, the Jew, and Esther, the queen, had ordered them, and as they had decreed for themselves and for their seed the matters of the fastings and of their cry. And the order of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book. And King Ahasuerus laid a tax on the land and on the isles of the sea, and all the acts of his power and of might, and the declaration of the greatness of Mordecai, with which the king made him great. Are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai, the Jew, was next to King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and pleasing to the multitude of his brothers, seeking the wealth of his people, and speaking peace to all his seed.
Yay! Let's hear it from Mordecai. All right, is there anyone here who wonders how old Mordecai was at this time? Anyone who knows? I can tell you, Mordecai historically was 124 years old. That's how old Mordecai was, and that can be proven historically, mathematically, and everything else when you look at the fact that when Jeconiah was taken captive in the list, Mordecai was taken with him. And he was part of the 10,000 that were taken captive. His name is mentioned in the Bible. And when you know the date of that and you know the date of the book of Esther, he was like 124 years old. Isn't that amazing? Now, the other thing I want to point out real quick is, do you remember how in this one verse it kept speaking about how they did not take of the spoils. Do you know why that was so important? Because 500 years earlier, when King Saul, who Mordecai came from, was fighting against Agag, Haman's ancestor, the problem was they took of the spoils. That was the reason why they said that it was so important that they did not take the spoils. And so we have to realize and incorporate that into our mind as well. Okay, Sherry, come on up here a second. Where's the box? Okay. All right. How many of you saw the Torah Scroll? And we're having a raffle. This Torah Scroll is very incredible. Yeah, bring it on up here. This one here. All right, here comes Randy. Da, 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 da. All right. Yeah, bring it on up here. Randy, you can help me, though, too. I want you to notice this Torah Scroll. It has these two crowns on it. You also have this crown or shield that comes with it. You also have the yod, and then you have the dressing. And under the dressing, you also have, if you want to kind of lift this up, you also have the, where's the girdle? Okay, yeah, let's pull this up here. You can also see it has that. And you can, all right, but you open it up, and this is a actual Torah scroll. It's an amazing. It has the Hebrew. It has all the normal things. It retails for about $125, something like that. But we are putting it up as a raffle. We only got 3. There's 2 that are for sale. Here you go. All right, thank you. And now we're going to draw to see who gets this from this $1 raffle. All right, so we will let Saint Randy pull one out. This better not be one of your tickets. Here we go. Are we ready? 6, 9, 5, 8, 2, 9. Oh, let's see the ticket. Let's see the ticket. All right, let me see which one it is. He's the winner. And now, yeah, go ahead and give them all of that. And now, Sherry, I'm going to have you tell people, we got another raffle. Oh, that's right. We have another raffle. Here we go. One more. Don't give up. Here we go. Here, come over here and announce what all is in here. Randy, you can
Have a tallit. And we have an Israeli flag, and we have a mezuzah and a tallit. So it's a wonderful.
Here we go. Okay, here we go. 6, 9, 5, 9, 4, 7. Woo! All right. Okay, you know what? How many wants to do one more thing? Okay, I'm going to draw one more tag, and the prize will be you go down to the bookstore and pick one thing out of the bookstore. Well, one thing. Except the 2 scrolls that are down there. I thought they were up here. Okay, here you go. Are you ready? We're going to do one more just for fun, and then Cherry's going to make an announcement about all the good food. Are you ready? 6, 9, 5, 7, 9, 0. Hey! All right. She runs the bookstores. Oh, no.
Okay, so to clean up, now the fun part, right? All right, there's a white plastic bag that I'll pass to the end of each table. if you could assign somebody to just take the trash, leave the good food, we'll collect that. Put the water pitchers on one of the rolling carts back there, and then please just throw everything away that has been used. Okay? Okay, so I'll bring your trash bags to your table. Thank you. Hope you had fun.